Well, hi everybody. Today I'm being joined by a super lady that I met quite recently, has come into my world, and we've been chatting about various things that we work towards and things we've left behind. And I'd like to introduce Joanne Monck OBE.
Yeah, hi. Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this podcast and share my thoughts and my life, really.
Thank you. Absolutely can't wait. I absolutely can't wait. So what I was hoping we'd touch on today, Joanne, is about how when we want to create something new, a new idea, a new being, and in your case, I think a new person, and the courage that takes and the steps we have to take. And could you just talk a little bit about the journey you went through?
Yeah, well, David was my previous name. He was born in 1955, but he had something inside him that at the time he didn't understand. And that was Joanne. And at the time of his birth, a tree was planted. And as it grew, the branches, the trunk were David's, but the roots were Joanne's. And Joanne would feed him with her thoughts, her desires, her emotions, all the way through his life until he came to the point where he had to accept that he had to release Joanne from the prison that she felt she was in. And to David, it felt like a virus so powerful that he could never dream to cure it. He knew from about the age of 5 he was different. All his friends were girls. He didn't like doing the things that other boys did. He was bullied constantly at school, and I think he was bullied because people picked on him because they realized that there was something different about him. He used to dress in clothes that his mother had put out in a little dressing up box. And when he did that, that was when he was happiest. He went through school, as I say, being bullied. He left school with virtually no qualifications and went to work on a farm. He, by that time, was buying his own clothes, but he was buying them under the pretense of perhaps buying them for a girlfriend. He would never admit that they were for him, but he knew what he wanted. He wanted to be a girl. He wanted to be female. And the power that Joanne had in his body was overwhelming at times. And often he used to purge. He perhaps burn all the clothes that he'd bought, thinking that, look, I was born male, I have to validate my life, I'm male, and that's the end of the story. But of course, Joanne was trying to validate her life as well. But she was far stronger than he was. And he ended up in his early 20s with a nervous breakdown because he couldn't come to terms with what was happening to him. Life goes on. He had girlfriends, but he had girlfriends more because he wanted to be like them rather than actually have a relationship with them. And eventually he got married because that was what was expected of him. He was male. That's what he had to do. That's what his parents would have wanted him to do. And he could never have told them, particularly in his early years, because the word transgender wasn't even in the dictionary. So he got married. He had 2 lovely boys who he absolutely adored. But his wife was very domineering, and in order for him to do what he wanted to do, and that was to dress, he had to do it in private. So he'd find an excuse to go out in the car. He'd take clothes with him. He'd dress in the car, sit in the car for an hour, and then go back home again. He'd dress in the shed, hoping that she never found out. He did all the macho things as well. He tried to, he became a part-time firefighter because that's what men did. They did these really powerful macho jobs, but it didn't last because he was never happy, because Joanne was completely dominating his life. These roots that Joanne had at the bottom of his tree were so strong. They were almost shaping his own personality, his own characteristics, but nobody could see them because she was still hidden. She was still locked up in his body. And he stayed in the marriage probably because of guilt towards his wife. He stayed in the marriage out of an undying love for his twin boys, but inside he was emotionally dying. He was physically dying, and it was a terrible time for him. The dressing continued, the purging continued. Eventually his wife died. Bereavement was a phase that he had to go through, but in a way he felt that he could now be free because there was nobody going to contradict or question what he was doing. But even then he couldn't accept it, and he went on to do more macho things. It came to a point back in the beginning of 2014 at the age of 58 where he went and sat on the edge of Beachy Head. Beachy Head, local beauty spot which people associate with suicide attempts. But David went up there more to reflect on his own life. And I use the word validate again because that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to validate his life. But Joanne was so strong inside him that her emotions, her thoughts, her desires just overwhelmed everything that he wanted to do. And in the end, they became so powerful that in order for David to be happy, he had to accept that he wasn't destined to be male. He'd always been destined to be female. And he'd started the process of transition. And immediately he did that, it was almost as if somebody had undone a long zip on his body, and out came Joanne. She'd been released from the prison that she'd been in for 58 years. But in a way, I suppose David had protected her for those 58 years as well. And I describe it sometimes as David was always the ugly caterpillar, and always searching for his rainbow. And when he started the transition process, the tree was chopped down, but the roots were still there. They were Joanne's and they weren't going anywhere. And she formed her own tree, and the branches were hers, the trunk was hers, everything about it was hers. And at that point, he found his rainbow. And everybody says, what do you find at the end of the rainbow? Well, you find a pot of gold. But David didn't. He found sackfuls of happiness. And Joanne was able to pick that happiness up. And then my transition process started, changing my name by deed poll. after my mother, going on to hormones, having gender surgery, and changing my birth certificate so I was legally female, because that was my ultimate goal. And compared to how David was, I am almost completely the opposite. I'm very extrovert. I love socializing. I've got hundreds of friends. I'm happy. But if I compare that to how David was, he was very inward, very antisocial, didn't have any friends, kept himself to himself. And there's a big contrast in there. But in a way, David passed on some of his personality to Joanne. But the overriding factor that was, when the tree was cut down, Joanne could shape her own personality through the roots that had always been there.
Thank you. That is so, it's so powerful listening to you speak about that. And thank you so much for sharing that. And the words that you touched upon of guilt, and then freedom, validation, all of these words are things that when we're going through a really, really tough time, we have to come up against. And I think that's why quite often, more often than not, people will back down and say, well, I can't go through with this because, you know, it's going to hurt somebody else, or it's going to do, you know, more harm than good, or what have you, and all these things that run through our minds. And when I spoke with you before, and we've spoken several times about this now, it just screamed into view for me that actually, if we can help anybody who's going through a really big decision about changing, to listen to those words, to listen to how you've overcome that situation, how insightful you are of talking about David in third person, which is where you've placed him, but acknowledging that he actually protected you. And a lot of times we live in a state that we don't want to be in, because it does feel safe. It's not happy, but it feels safer than that, as you say, going across to the end of the rainbow and seeing what's there. And the fact that you've done it in such a, you know, an extreme way, most people will never experience what you've experienced. And then from that, you've picked freedom, and you've you know, when we spoke the other evening, and I said to you about David, losing David, and you said it was a happy bereavement. David died and Joanna was born. So not all bereavement is sad. Not all bereavement is tragic. And in this case, for David to die to allow Joanne to be born and thrive and survive is just absolutely incredible. We spoke about values, didn't we? And the other evening when I said to you, do you think that your values were the same as David, as they are with Joanne? And I think the answer you gave was, well, David was very kind and so is Joanne. So you've shared that value, because we were exploring, weren't we, whether as a completely different person, which you are now, which bits you chose to bring forward. And I think that's the other thing that's so powerful with NLP, is that when we work with people that are coming forward with a big change, it could be a small change, but if it's big to them, it's big. What do they want to bring forward with them? And I think when we spoke about it, you said, yes, there are resonations of things I've brought forward with me that I wouldn't want to let go of. And there's other things that I ditched. And so what you've done way before even us meeting is you've gone through this entire NLP process of on forward coaching, of how you put right your thoughts about yesterday, because you can't change it, and how you do create today, and how you do look forward to tomorrow and what you're going to do. And you're doing some incredible work now. I mean, you've really opened up now, and you know, made beautiful out of bad, haven't you? Because you're doing some. Could you just talk, you know, a little bit about what you're doing now?
Well, I think it's quite appropriate to talk about this because obviously February is National LGBT History Month as well. So after I started my transition, I became a voluntary community first responder for South East Coast Ambulance Service. And because I was going through transition, I told them, yeah, we're absolutely fine with this. Would you be a diversity champion for us? Basically being someone there to support other people within the organization that were perhaps going through the same thing. Sadly, due to a life-threatening medical condition, I had to leave the ambulance service and lost my role as a diversity champion. But because I developed this passion to support and help people going through what I'd been through, albeit it's a lot easier these days because there's more understanding. I diverted my attention to supporting other organisations, including Sussex Police, where I serve on 6 different advisory panels, helping them, in some of them, to understand what it's like to be transgender, to bust the myths, to allow them to become more inclusive and more proactive in the way that they communicate, with dignity and respect to the transgender community. I became the Equality, Inclusion and Diversity Advisor at the Bluebell Heritage Railway. And that was interesting because a lot of the volunteers there were elderly and they just didn't understand. And I was incorrect pronouns and I got funny looks every time I went up there. And I felt that this was something I needed to change. And I did it by putting myself literally in front of them and saying, look, this is me. I'm a human being. I'm no longer male. I'm female. And this is why I had to transition. And I explain my story. And that's what I do. I explain my story to so many people to help them understand and get this awareness of the issues that many of the transgender community face. I got involved with the Crown Prosecution Service after I had some very vitriolic hate on social media. And I do a lot now for hate crime and hate crime awareness with Sussex Police and the CPS, and trying in a way to help them understand that transphobic hate is just not acceptable. And we look at LGBT History Month, and the theme for it is body, mind, and spirit. So perhaps my interpretation of body would be how you appreciate your body. Are you overweight? Are you fit? How do you feel? Do you feel comfortable with the way you look? Spirit. Well, spirit is actually a difficult one, but I think that's how you feel in yourself. Do you feel happy in your own spirit to actively get on with your life, or do you want to go backwards and go into a shell? And that links in with mind, because mind is very much connected with mental health. And particularly at the moment, I mean, we've got the coronavirus pandemic, and a lot of people are suffering with mental health issues from being locked down, being kept in. But what you have to remember is the transgender community are already suffering from mental health because of what they're going through. It's not an easy journey. And I describe that journey as entering a long, dark tunnel, but at the end of it, there's a light. And as you walk through the tunnel, there's lots of obstacles to negotiate, and you trip up. You might step a few steps back. It's it's not an easy ride. I mean, I was lucky because I did my journey on my own. I didn't ask for support from anybody. I walked the narrow path because it was mine and mine alone. And eventually I got to the end of the tunnel. I grabbed hold of that light. And after my gender surgery, the pupa that had formed from the ugly caterpillar hatched into this beautiful butterfly. Not that I am beautiful, but hatched into this beautiful butterfly that flew up and dried her wings in the tree that had always been there with my roots.
It's absolutely incredible, and it's so humbling to hear you talk about it, and the good that you're bringing to other people now, and the awareness you're bringing to other people who perhaps have never ever had any connection with somebody transgender, have no idea what that actually means. And as when we spoke again, you said, would anybody think that I just want to go and do that just as a whim? And it's just to really illustrate, and you've done it so beautifully today, illustrate how powerful the need and the want to be recognized as who we are is, and whoever that person is absolutely okay. And I think you got a trinket from somewhere for that, didn't you? I think it's called the OBE, Joanne. Which is,
I was wondering
I
if
didn't want to finish without
no.
touching on that.
Well, last year, despite the COVID pandemic, was an amazing year for me. In the summer, I was the highlighted winner of the diversity category for the We Are the City Rising Star Awards, which is a national award for women, specifically for women. So to be accepted into that was just amazing, but to actually be a winner was mind-blowing. I received a Chief Constable's commendation for service and dedication to Sussex Police and the CPS as a volunteer. And I thought that was amazing. But then at the beginning of December, I got a brown letter in the post that I thought was from the tax office. I didn't open it for about 5 hours. And then I thought, no, perhaps I'd better. And inside was this letter from the Cabinet Office saying, Dear Joanne Monck, we're writing to you in the strictest confidence that you have been honoured with an OBE by Her Majesty the Queen in the New Year's Honours List for services to transgender equality. And I was absolutely blown away. And it's changed my life. And you mentioned earlier on about carrying on the values of David. And one of those values that David had was kindness. And that is one that has definitely been transferred to Joanne, because I will do anything for anybody, no matter what it takes, even if it puts me to a lot of time. I'm now a global mentor. I'm a global LGBT advocate for an organization called Interlife Pride Global. It's just been amazing, and I'm doing so much. I've become an ambassador for an includability ambassador for an international recruitment organization called Ellis Knight. We've got a launch event coming up at the end of February for that, with other guest speakers that are taking on different roles. And they're things that I would never have dreamt would happen. And they certainly wouldn't have happened to David. But when David died, and I use the word died because that's what happened, and Joanne was born, my life completely changed, and dreams almost became a reality.
It's just absolutely staggering to hear you talk about it, and it's been absolutely so inspiring listening to you. And talking about life after bereavement and whether it was a good bereavement in your case. I mean, you had a not so good bereavement with your late wife, and I respect that you had a very good bereavement with David. And I think that the overriding thing today to think about is, if you do want it and you believe that it's, you know, you believe it's who you want to be, then go for it and do it, and use all the resources that you can get to help you.
It's very important for anybody to believe in themselves, to believe in their own abilities, no matter what they are. We've all got something we can give to society, and if you truly believe in them, you can be successful. And that's what happened to me.
Absolutely fabulous. And if people want to get hold of you, and I'm sure they will, because I know you're really in demand now, how do they get hold of you first and foremost?
Well, I think the easiest way, if people want to talk to me, because I'm going to get involved in public speaking and other events, hopefully, is for them to email me. And my email address is Joanne, so JOANNEMONCK _OBE at AOL.com. So it's Joanne Monck _OBE at AOL.com. You can find me on Twitter at Joanne Monck. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. I'm everywhere now.
Absolutely fabulous. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And thank you very, very much indeed.
Well, thank you, Jules, as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.